Hello, I'm David Harper with the BBC News. A new United Nations report has found that the world's richest 1% of people are responsible for more than twice the volume of carbon emissions produced by the poorest 50%. Here's our environment correspondent, Matt McGrath.
Despite a rapid drop-off in greenhouse gas emissions this year due to the pandemic shutdowns, the UN says the world is still heading for dangerous levels of warming this century. While government actions are critical, the report says that the very richest in society should also look to curtail their high-carbon lifestyles. To keep the world safe, the top 1% would need to slash their emissions by a factor of 30 over the next decade. The report also says that a green recovery from the pandemic could make a significant difference and would cut carbon by 25% over the next 10 years.
The United Arab Emirates has said it's approved a Chinese coronavirus vaccine, which is 86% effective. This appears to be the first indication of the performance of a Chinese antivirus drug. Sinopharm, the company behind the vaccine, has not yet published its own data, even though the jab has already been given to 1 million people in China. The UAE has been taking part in third-phase trials. Members of President-elect Joe Biden's coronavirus task force say they expect it will take at least a year for the United States to achieve herd immunity to COVID-19. Dr. Eric Gooseby told the BBC that even if the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine received official approval in the coming days, the population would not reach the required level of immunity for some time.
15 to 30% are positive now. We need to reach 70% to achieve herd immunity. With the combination of individuals who are infected from the virus itself, matched with the vaccination groups, we will be able to get there toward the end of the year, beginning of the following year, at the end of the year for 2021.
A parliamentary report in Australia has recommended that the mining company Rio Tinto reconstruct ancient Aboriginal rock shelters it destroyed earlier this year. The interim report also said the firm should pay compensation and observe a moratorium on mining in sensitive areas. Rio Tinto blew up the Juukan Gorge caves in Western Australia in May, despite warnings about the site's cultural significance. But our correspondent in Sydney, Phil Mercer, says the firm's actions weren't illegal.
Under Western Australia's Aboriginal Heritage Act, the company had been granted permission to destroy the caves, but the report said that the laws were, quote, woefully out of date and poorly administered. So I think what we can take from that is those laws favoured heavily mining companies at the expense of Indigenous people to whom land is the mother of all creation.
Phil Mercer reporting from Sydney. You're listening to the latest world news from the BBC. Chancellor Angela Merkel has said that Germany will not be able to vaccinate enough of its citizens against the coronavirus to change the course of the pandemic in the first quarter of next year. Mrs. Merkel also called for tougher restrictions, saying people hadn't reduced their contact with others to a sufficient degree. She said shops should be closed until early next year, but everything possible would be done to keep schools and nurseries open. The Nigerian President, Muhammadu Buhari, says his administration is investing heavily in military equipment, including aircraft. There have been numerous recent attacks by Islamist militants in northeast Nigeria, leading to criticism of the government's handling of security. Mayeni Jones has the details.
What is perhaps most notable in President Buhari's latest statement on insecurity is how little he talked of the troubled northeast. He only mentioned the region, which has been rocked by terrorist attacks for over a decade, to say his administration had done well there. The statement comes less than 2 weeks after 43 farmers were killed by Islamist militants in Borno State. Instead, the president insisted insecurity was worse elsewhere, namely in the south, where he said oil installations were sabotaged daily. Speaking about October's anti-police brutality protests, he said violent demonstrations would not be tolerated.
Security officials in the Iraqi city of Kirkuk say insurgents have caused explosions at 2 oil wells and set off fires. The officials blame the Islamic State group for the attack. Plumes of dense smoke are filling the sky and fumes are said to have extended as far as the Iraqi capital Baghdad, 300 kilometres away. An influential hardline Iranian cleric, Ayatollah Mohammad Yazdi, has died at the age of 89. He was regarded as one of the country's most conservative clerics. Ayatollah Yazdi was prominent on the Assembly of Experts, which appoints Iran's supreme leader and oversees his performance. He was sanctioned by the US this year. BBC News.